Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim Perek Dalet Halacha Vav. We are going to be learning today Daf Mem Gimel, right? The final Daf of this chapter. We are beginning on Daf Mem Beis, Amud Beis, Gemara, right? The last line in the Amud. And let's begin by saying the following. The first small topic we will have will be the Gemara's clarifying of how we are to measure, let's say, the 8 Amos in a 2-row vineyard, that if there is a space of 8 amos or more, it disconnects the 2 rows from forming a kedem. How do you measure it? But shortly afterwards, on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara is going to open up today's really complex sugya by quoting Rabbi Lazar, which is an Amoira, right? Rabbi Eliezer, but pronounced without the aleph. Rabbi Lazar's statement, and here are the words that hechmiru toichoi yoiser michutzaloi. Don't forget, whenever we're speaking about vineyard versus a singular vine, 4 amas versus 6 tfachim, the issue isn't only regarding planting seeds outside of the vineyard. The issue is also whether you are allowed to plant a foreign seed in between the rows inside the vineyard. And bepashtus, as we learned correctly so, there's no difference. If you need 6 tvachim, you need 6 tvachim. Outside, inside, whether you need to have a distance of 4 amos, has to be 4 amos, whether you're planting foreign seed outside the vineyard or inside between the rows. But we're going to see Rabbi Lazar insists that no, it's not in details. Hechmiru toichai yoiser mechutzaloi. There are more stringencies vis-a-vis planting something inside the vineyard versus planting something outside the vineyard. And we're going to work hard to understand exactly what and where and who and how is Rabbi Lazar referring to. Now, the Gemara is going to spend some time going into the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the Mishnah regarding a kedem that was initially a kedem gadol. That means you had 3 rows or more. And therefore, it was bound by the rule of under 16 versus 16 amos. And then you removed, you destroyed an inner row. Right now, you only have a 2-row vineyard. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the one that holds that it retains the rules of a 3-row kedem, meaning that if from the current 2 rows, the outermost from one side and the outermost from the other side, if you have less than 16 amos, lo yavoy zera lisham. And what we will have in the Gemara, I touched on it very bekitzer. And Chadra, I want to tell you that we're going to go back and we're going to read a Mara Fulda on Daf Mem Beis in the Mishnah. And as we will see, that the Gemara is going to make a connection between our Mishnah, this topic, right? 2 rows, 8 amos, 3 rows or more, 16 amos, and the opening halacha in the Perek of Korachas HaKerem, that lebeis Hillel, you also need to have at least 16 amos, right, to be allowed to plant in some of it, in the middle part of it, in the 8 amos of that. We're going to see that link that will be extremely important, but it's a little bit nuanced. And actually, we're going to therefore also go to the Shitas Beis Shammai regarding Korachas HaKerem that holds that 16 amos is not enough, but you have to have 24 amos if you already have a vineyard. And now there is a Korachas opening gap. In order for you to be allowed to plant foreign seed, Beis Shammai, you have to have 24. And here will be the words that Beis Shammai machmirim b'churbanoi yoiser mimatatoi, as we'll explain this. That will be the bulk of today's daf. And then we'll see how much time we have. Don't forget, we also had the ending, the final part of the Mishnah, Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, was the Mishnah's introducing Shitas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir. And they say the words that they do not differentiate between a 3-row and a 2-row vineyard, right? They say that even if it's a 3-row, you're bound by the rule of 8 amos, right? That's a huge leniency. In other words, they're saying that even if you have a 3-row, 4-row, 100-row vineyard, if between one row and the other there's 8 amos, not 16, 8, they're not connected, and you don't have a vineyard. And you will be allowed to plant seeds inside of it or outside of it. In other words, you're always bound by the rule of 6 tfachim, but you don't have the rule of dalid amos. We're gonna show that there's a machlokes amoyroim, how to understand the machlokes how to understand Shitas Rab Shimon and Rav Meir, and the Gemara is going to paskin which Amayda is correct, and it's going to be the most lenient application of the din of Rab Shimon and Rav Meir, if we'll have time. And this is already going to go towards the end of the Pedic. We're going to quote for the first time the Tana Rabbi Yishmael that is extremely lenient if you only have a single vine, single meaning not one. If it's not a vineyard, we keep on saying that if you don't have a vineyard, okay, it's not 4 amas, it's 6 tfachim. Rabbi Yishmael holds ein avoida legefen yechidus. You don't even need to have 6 tfachim. We'll see what that means. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yishmael, but we're going to introduce a new, very lenient opinion if we'll get to it today. If not, God willing, in next year, when we're going to conclude the 4th chapter. And now, without any further ado, Chavre, if you need coffee, take a coffee, because it's going to get really beautiful. It's going to get nuanced. The beginning is easy. Says the Gemara, right up, and the last line on the Amid. Let's go in the opening case of the Mishnah. That if you have a kerem katan, which is defined by you only having 2 rows, the Beis Hillel, whether it's 3 and 3 or even 3 and 2, as long as it is shtayim keneged shtayim ba'achas yoytze zadov. So you only have a vineyard if there is less than 8 amas between one row and the other. Now the question is, how do you measure it? There's opportunity for Kevin to start drawing his pictures. Amar Rab Ze'eda, that Shemaina, when you have 8, it's chutz mimakoim. Now there's different ways of learning the Gemara. We're going to pronounce the next word, the final word in the Amid, kirasim. Kirasim means trunks. In other words, the width of the vine trunks themselves are not taken into account. You have to, in other words, when do we disconnect the rows? When are we not able to make a kerem? If you have a full 8 amas of empty space, excluding the width of the vines. And now, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph says the Gemara, this isn't only over here. No one is arguing with it. Now that we established that, now that we clarified that, we're going to quickly jump ahead to Daf Mem Zayin. I know I quoted this yesterday in the introduction. And what are we going to learn soon in Daf Mem Zayin? That just like if there is a max distance between the rows, they disconnect one from the other. You cannot form a kerem. Interestingly, even if the rows are very near, you also will not have a kerem. Kerem has to allow, the Mishnah says, to have at least 4 amas separating one row and the other. So now we put everything together by a kerem katan. You only have a vineyard halachically if in between the rows you have between 4 and 8. By a kerem gadol between 4 and 16. Oh, so there also udikavase arba, when you have to, when we're saying that you need to have 4 amas, and if you have less than 4 amas, even though it's packed, exactly, it's packed, it's not a vineyard. How do you count to 4? Also, chutz mimakoim karasim. The row of the vines must be 4 amas apart and not less. In other words, when you measure the 4 amas, you do not include the space taken up by the trunks. You get it, guys? Notes, unless you have 4 amas of empty space between the rows, you don't have a vineyard. So we're consistent. These measurements, both here on Halacha Vav and on Daf Mem Zayin, exclude the area of the trunks. Amachayim, Nakuda, end. And now we begin. Now we're really beginning today's stuff. Okay, here we go. Says the Holy Gemara. Now this is Rabbi Lazar, just for the record, this is the Amoira. He makes a statement. Here are his words. The words are Hechmiru toichoi yoiser mechutzaloi, that you see from the hour halachem that the Chachamim were more stringent when it comes to the question of whether you are or not allowed to plant foreign seed inside. Inside means in between the rows. There is a greater stringency vis-a-vis inside versus chutzaloi, whether you want to plant a foreign seed outside the vineyard. Now, this has to be understood because the statement that we keep on making is correct, the general statement. If you need 6 tvachim, okay, doesn't matter on which side of the row. If you need to have 4 amas, doesn't matter which side of the row. You have to leave the minimum distance, and then you can plant foreign seed. Says Rabbi Lazar, no, not always. And now they were grappling. No, the other Amirayim were putting their minds to try to understand what Rabbi Lazar was the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. Sometimes he argues with Rabbi Yochanan. What does he mean? So Amar Rab Ze'era, that now I'll tell you something, that Ad Da'ano Tamon, even, don't forget guys, we learned this in the Yerushalmi recently in Brachas, and we learned this in the Babli. Rabbi Ze'era, or Rab Ze'era, he made Aliyah, he moved from Babel to Eretz Yisrael, and he's sharing now something that he already figured out even before he went to Eretz Yisrael. That it says, Rab Ze'era, that Ad Da'ano, come on, even when I was still over there, means in Babel, Kiyamta, I already figured out exactly what Rabbi Elazar means. Now, I know that really we should read the Gemara. I want you to keep your finger in the Gemara. Right, okay, I'll just read the words. What are you talking about? No, it's inside 8 amas, outside 16 amas. What are we talking about? So before, keep your finger in the Gemara. We're gonna and look inside the Mara folder. We're going to follow today's stuff according to the Mara folder. There's a lot of different ways of understanding it. And like I said, at some point, we're going to go back to read the Mara folder and that Membez Amadalef in the Mishnah, something that we just glazed on, but we're going to have to dive into it. So 7 lines from the top of the Mara folder. Kiyamte, I got it. He says, when I was there, I established the Pshat of Rabbi Lazar. That Hoyisi Mekayim Umefarish Lahad Rabbi Lazar Hach. Kamo. What? Talmud Ditnan. Ches Ames. The Tezain Ames. In our Mishnah, Bereisha. Bereisha means when you have a Kedem Katan, we're referring to Halacha Vav, right? If it's only 2 rows, then the cutoff point is 8 Ames. This is a leniency. That means if you have 8 Ames of space, you have no more Kedem. This Seifa, when you have a Kedem Gadol, when you have 3 rows or more, then the Mishnah says, if it's under 16 Ames, you have a Kedem. To disconnect the rows, you have to have an empty space of 16 amas. Al zeh amra Rabbi Elazar. The Marafulda doesn't have to quote his words. His words are hechemiru toichai yoiser mechutz aloi. Meaning, the toichai means that midalid va'at shmoina asur lahavi zera l'sham. And if you did bring inside the vineyard a foreign seed, what would happen? The Kaddish. The Kaddish means that you're going to make everything asur b'hana. Again, just another detail, just not to make a mistake, just putting it into the ground, which is asur to do, doesn't create the Mekadesh. The Mekadesh, the actual Isur Bahana, is if you left it in the ground long enough for there to be an additional growth that will not become bottled the Echad in 200. We're going to learn about that later in Mishnayos, don't worry. But anyway, in other words, the Chatchila you can't do it, and if you do it, now Mekadesh also means it's Asur Midoiraisa. That is what creates the Kilei Haked. Reading it inside. That im not ashurais kanmoy ugefana at shmayna amas. In other words, you didn't leave 8 amas gap, so you created the kedem. Ben shura l'shura uben gefen legefen im mekay makarasim hareza asur ukedetnan b'masnis l'tanekam Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov asur umekadesh im zara b'ches amas mekadesh asur b'hano. However, the chutzah. What's the chutzah? You have to know what he's saying. That that when you have a kedem gadol, and what are we saying that by a kedem gadol? When do we disconnect the rows if it's under 16? So that's the case of the kedem gadol, guys. You planted a vineyard. You have more than 3 rows. You have 3 rows or more. You didn't leave. The rows are not under 8. The rows are between 8, but they're under 16. So you have a kedem gadol. What happens if you planted a seed in between the rows? So when you read the Mishnah, you would think, okay, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're not following the rule of 16. It doesn't. There's no 16, so it's connected. So it's a vineyard. So you gotta have daladama. So he says no. That if you planted it in the kedem gadol, and the vines, the rows are between 8 and 16. In a Tom Shmuel, you know when you will make an Isur Hana, guys? Only if you planted it within 6 tfachim. Wow.
Stavachim of what?
Wow. He's saying that, yes, the Mishnah said, when you learn the Mishnah, it's simple. 2 or 3. 2, 8, 3, 16. He says, no, hold on a second. He says, no matter what size vineyard, if the rows are within 8 amas, and now you have a kerem, if you plant within daled amas, asr bahana, the result. If the rows are in between 8 under 16, even though we are saying you still have yourself a kerem, when you have 3 rows or more, you have a kerem. But if you planted now outside 6 tfachim, which is asur, it's only midrabanan, and therefore it will not make it asur bahana. You were not allowed to plant it, but it won't have the effect of isur hana. Where are we getting this from? How do we get that? Because we are beginning to say the following. Where do we get number 16? Now, you can ask, where do we get 8? I'll tell you where we get 8. 8 is because when you have a vineyard, we keep on saying that the avoida area, why are you not allowed to plant within daladamas of a kerem? Because people need to work the vineyard. They would bring animals and plows, and the work utensils needed empty space. So between rows, if I need for every row by a kerem 4 amas, 4 amas and 4 amas is 8 amas. So if you don't even have that, they're mamash connected. 8 and 16 is a derabanan, and it's based on the rule of karachas hakerem. Now we have to go back to the beginning of the chapter. Now there's a big difference between the beginning of the perek and now. Now we're learning about you lechatchila planting. You are lechatchila planting a vineyard, leaving X amount of space between rows. The beginning of the perek is speaking about a scenario where you already have a kerem. And let me make it clear. You have a kerem biblically because in between each row there was less than 8 amas. I don't care if there were 10 rows. It was less than 8 at the beginning of the perek. And now you made a karachas, you made a bald spot. You emptied out a couple of rows. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that if you have 16 amas, then you can plant something in the middle. If you don't have 16 amas, you cannot. So we're making a link between the 16 amas that our Mishnah is speaking about when you are planting lekerem gadol to the kerem, to the karachas hakerem. And for the record, in the Mishnah's opening, in the beginning of Perek Dalet, Halacha Aleph, by karachas hakerem, where the Mishnah says, guys, lebeisilo, that you need to have 16 amas. If you did not have 16 amas and you planted, you're not going to make an isur hana. You violated the halacha midrabanan of karachas hakerem. He's making that link over here. Now, before we read on, this is so good. We didn't have time yesterday, it turned out. The guys, go back to Daf Mem Beis. And if you're using an art scroll, go into the second, right? 42A2. We don't need that because we'll be reading them on our folder. On Daf Mem Beis, when the Mishnah already, the Marafulda already took this information from here. The Mishnah said, guys, I'm going to the last Maharafulda of Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. It's 9 lines before the bottom of the Amid, right? It's like in the middle of the chunk under the Gemara. And the Mishnah says that Tanakam, that if you have a kerem of 3, 3 means not only 3 or more. Now you will begin to appreciate the words. Lo yavei zera l'sham, guys, doesn't mean that if you did it, you make an isur hana. It means you're not allowed to do it. And indeed, it's asur midrabanan. Why? But where do we get the 16 amas? Right away, says the Marafulda, shenasis k'moi karachas hakerem. This is linked to the karachas hakerem. Lebeisilo, of course, and we're passing like beisilo. The tzorech dezayin amo kedin karachas hakerem. Hoyel v'hu kerem gadol. Now here, kerem gadol means what, guys? Kerem gadol means 3 rows or more. I want to say something by heart. When we began to learn this perek, we added something that our Mishnah disagrees with. We added the Braisa. So it's a machlekes tanaim. What we said in the beginning is that when do you need to have a karachas hakerem, 16 amas, lebeisilo, or 24 lebeshamai, if what remains is 2 rows in the top and 2 rows in the bottom, at least. In other words, we need that the karachas should be inside a kerem. Minimum kerem is 2 rows. Our Mishnah is speaking about 3 rows. There's no empty space. But in between each of the 3 rows, you have less than 16 and less than 16. Now, if you're going to go to whichever direction you're going to go, if you're looking at the between the row on the right and the row in the center, you only have on one side 2 rows, but on the right side you only have 1 row. The Braisa in the beginning of this Pedic said that the whole stringency of Korachas HaKenem is only if after, when you're looking at the empty space from both sides, right? That's what we learned. We learned that whole deal. Yeah, it has to be surrounded either by 4 sides or by 3 sides or at least by 2 sides. Our Mishnah, according to this linkage, disagrees with that. We are saying that even when you have 3 rows, now when you have 4 rows, it's different. When you have 5 rows, it's different. Even by 3 rows, why did our Mishnah say you have to have 16 ames? Because in between the rows, you have a halacha. In between a vineyard, in the opening in a vineyard and an empty space in a vineyard, you have to have 16 amas to plant. That's where we get the 16 amas from. And the rest of the Maraful and Nachman Beis Amadalos clearly says, look at the end. When we call Makim, second to last line, and our Mishnah, if we're making the link that the number 16, under 16 verses 16, has to do with the din of Korachas HaKerem, which is a din derabanan, which does not mekadesh. Our Mishnah says the Marafulda, the Efsher, the Plukta, the Tanoi. Because when you have 3, either of the empty spaces will only have in one side 2, but on the other side only 1. Okay. Now, back to where we're up to. Abu Halpman, we are learning, we're going to go back inside the Gemara. So it's, when you read Toichai and Chutzaloi, let me tell you the greatness of Rab Ze'era and the Chachamim in Babel. It sounds like, we differentiate between whether you're planting foreign seed inside or outside. Rab Ze'era says it can be. It's a big chiddush what he's saying. He's saying a biur that takes the words out of the pshutan. He's saying it's not about inside or outside. Didn't mean that. It's about, there's a difference between whether you have a kedem, katan or gadol, that is under 8. That's taka going to create mekadesh, hechemiru. Chutzaloi means outside 8. That's what chutzaloi means. Not outside the vineyard, inside the vineyard. Even where you have to have 16, which is by a kedem gadol, and you have the rows less than 16. But if the rows are 8 amas till under 16, so it's chutzaloi from the 8 amas, you're not allowed to plant. But if you did, you're not going to create an isur hana. Amar Abu Lazar, ma'arba amas vat shmoina, asuru mekadesh, like we said. However, mishmoina vat sheish esrei. I want to tell you why he's saying ma'arba. Why does he say ma'arba, Danny? Because we just quoted the Mishnah on Daf Mem Zayin that if you plant rows that don't even have daladamis between one row and the other, then you b'chal don't have a kedem. When you don't have a kedem, all you need is 6 tvach. But when you have the proper configuration, now we're getting better. Even by a kedem gadol, people normally would they would go 8 amas. They would go under 8 amas. But if you're going from 4 until 8, which is the proper kedem, now you have a kedem doiraisa. Now, if you plant within daladamis, asadu mekadesh. And when you have migdalid va'at shmoina, no matter where you plant, it's going to be toich daladamis because you have 2 rows. So I'm not going to mention 6, but no matter. But mishmoina va'at shesh esrei. But if you left 8 or more, even though it sounds like from the Mishnah that by a kedem gadol we don't look at 8. Yes, we do. And that's the meaning of chutzaloi. Then, even though Taka, the Mishnah says asur, but if you did it, you're not going to make an isur hana because the isur of planting is only mitzad korachas hakerem, and korachas hakerem is a din derabanan. This topic is not ending. Now we're going to b'chlal understand the next machlokes of the Mishnah. So it comes along Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We already spoke out. If you planted a 3-vine vineyard, 3-row vineyard, and conforming the shiur of under 16, we gave an example yesterday that you left 10 amas between each row. All right, or let's go, or even if you left 5 amas between each row, better. Now, the Mishnah says you destroyed the inner row. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that as long as the both outer rows are still within 16 amas, even though they are beyond the under 8, the rule of the 3 row kerem will continue. That lo yavei zera l'sham, and the Tanakama disagrees. The Tanakama says that if now you only have 2 rows, and in between the rows you have 8 amas or more, now it's going to be a non-kerem, and the only sheet is now of 6 tefachim. That was the machloikas. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer.
Sorry, Rabbi, the fact that one thinks it's still a kerem and one does not, it has to do with the fact that at one point it was a kerem, right?
Yes. But now here's the link. Now that we established that the whole din of under 16 versus 16 has to do with karachas hakerem, now we have a big problem understanding Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It was bad enough, we quoted the Maharaf Fulda on Daf Mem Beis, that when you have a 3-row vineyard that you destroyed nothing, you don't need a picture, you just pick up your 3 fingers, and you have 2 gaps. Every gap, let's say, is 15 amas. So why are you not allowed to plant karachas hakerem? The problem is that we learned before karachas hakerem was only problematic if you have on each side a kerem. In our Mishnah, when you have 3 rows, you will only have a kerem from one side. So Enochanami, says the Maraf, must be that our Mishnah argues with that Baraisa, but even our Mishnah L'chu'ura holds you have to have a kerem from one side. The case of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov now is that you took out the middle one. Now you only have 2. From not one side do you have a kerem. 1 row is not a kerem, 1 row is not a kerem. If the whole din of 16 under 16 is karachas hakerem, it's too much. It's too much to say that there's a Tana that holds that you have no kerem anymore. 1 row is not a kerem lebeisilo. So why would he say it's? How can Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov be machna? So it's now we're understanding why
is it 1, not 2?
Danny, when I have 3 and I didn't destroy any, a minimum kerem lebeisilo is 2. So the spaces in between, whichever one you go, on one side you'll only have 1, but on the other side you'll have 2. When you have 3, if you only have 2 now, then there's 1 and 1. Beautiful. And that now we understand the Chachamim. The Chachamim hold, no, if you have 8 amas or more, it's mutter. You know, we just established Rabbi Eliezer. It's all based on Rabbi Eliezer. 8 on the other 8 is the cutoff always. No, the Mishnah says Kerem Gadol is under 16. Yeah. Karachas hakerem. But karachas hakerem, it's hard enough to swallow that you have a karachas hakerem if you only have a kerem on one side. To say that you have a din of karachas hakerem if you have no kerem, why? How is it called karachas hakerem? You don't have a bald spot in what kerem? That's the bomb question. And there's a gewaldige answer, guys. It's going to blow your head. So says the Gemara that Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, the only way now that we accept Rabbi Eliezer, the only way to explain Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, this is a great solution because he follows Beis Shammai. Wow. Now hold on, guys. Don't get nervous. By Karachas hakerem, Beis Shammai says you need to have 24 amas. He doesn't follow Beis Shammai for 24 amas. Don't get confused. But for one din, Beis Shammai says that a kerem is defined by 1 row. But I want to add something. The 1 row has to have 5 vines. So we're saying a big chiddush that when does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say his din? That even if you only begin with 3 rows, if you take out the middle row, you have to stick, it's 16 amas, under 16. If both rows have 5 vines, the Mishnah never spoke about the number of vines, but we're just adding that. But we have to say, B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, Asir Rabbi Yaakov B'Shamai, that Kamod the B'Shamai Yom B'Shura Achas Kerem, Kain Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov must hold Shura Achas Kerem. This is a Gavaldik answer. But now we got a problem. I'll tell you where we have a problem. Because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says in the Mishnah, guys, that when you had 3 and now you destroyed 1 and now you have 2, you're bound still by the 16 amas. And I'm reading the words of the Mishnah, but he himself is Moida She'ilu mitchila neta'an, if lechatchila you only would have planted 2 rows, then the shear of 8 amas is enough. But now we got a problem. What's the problem? According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Danny, each row is a kedem. Why would he differentiate between 2 rows and 3 rows? Even when you plant 2 rows, that 1 row is a kedem if it's 5 vines. The other row is a kedem 5 vines. The space in between is korachas hakedem. I get it. You don't need to have 24, but you should need to have 16, under 16 versus 16. So the Gemara says, "Woo! If Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov follows Beis Shammai, now miman of shach." Number 1, kedem gadol hu. Ideally, each row Beis Shammai is a kedem. So even 2 rows should be defined Beis Shammai as a kedem gadol. And what's the din of a kedem gadol? That even if you have a gap of 8, even when you have shmoina, as long as it is under Beis Shammai 24, but Beis Hillel 16, you can't plant it. So that's number 1. B'di'evet, b'doichik, what are you going to say? That for some reason, even Beis Shammai, if you only have 1 row, it's taka called a kedem, Danny, but it's only a kedem cotton. Let's go with that. Just like Beis Hillel, 2 rows is a kedem cotton, 3 is a kedem gadol. Beis Shammai, 1 row is a kedem cotton, and 2 is a kedem gadol. So says the Gemara from Maimonasha, even if it's a kedem cotton, doesn't matter. But still, no, I don't care if you don't classify a row as a kedem gadol. Each row is a kedem. How much space do you need by a kedem, guys? 4 amas. Now, let me say something. Even if korachas hakedem is only by a kedem gadol from one side, and here when you have 2 rows, it's from no sides. That's the miman of shach. But this is a kedem. How much space do you need from a kedem, guys? 4 amas. 4 amas. How much space do you need from the other kedem cotton? A kedem, 4 amas.
4 to 8. Okay.
So I guess if you have 8 amas in a drop, so there is a space that allows for empty 4 amas, mela. But how can Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say, even if you're going to say, oh, even Beis Shammai, this kedem gadol, kedem cotton, korachas hakedem demands for at least one side to have a kedem gadol. Okay, I'll go with that. But it's a kedem cotton. And the Mishnah is saying, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying the words that if lechatchila you plant 2 rows, muter b'shmoina amas. How can it be muter b'shmoina amas? If you have exactly 8 amas, you don't have where to plant. If you have 8 amas and a tefach, you can plant on that tefach. That's the Gemara's kash. Even if you're going to say kedem cotton, but kedem cotton should be muter shmoina and a bit, but not exactly with shmoina. Whichever place you plant, it's going to be betoich dalid of a kedem. If you have exactly 8, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis gives the Gemara 2 answers. Answer number 1, Abiyudin says, indeed, even though the words in the Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is She'ilu mitchila natan hayamuter b'shmoina, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean those words exactly. Rabbi Yudan says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov lo yomarke. Elo, what he really meant was, if lechatchila you plant 2 rows, then if it's exactly shmoina, it's still aser. But what he meant was shmoina amas v'chol shehu then muter, and came and put on the top picture. Top picture means that's what he meant. But in other words, even Beis Shammai, even though 1 row is a kedem, we differentiate kedem cotton, kedem gadol. The din of korachas hakedem is only when you have on one side a kedem gadol, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, if you have on one side initially a kedem gadol, he's mechadish that even though now you don't have a kedem gadol, the din remains of one-sided kedem gadol. That's one answer. And the next answer is the Boilam Eimar, that we're teaching the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the Mishnah. She'ilu mitchila netono imuta b'shmoina ames. It means she'ilu mitchila netono mata sheish al sheish esrei. If you would have left the entire 16 amas, if you would have left the entire 16 amas, so now look at the bottom picture. The bottom picture is amas. We're speaking about, guys, look at the bottom. The bottom is, guys, all of this is following Beis Shammai. Remember that. Beis Shammai, the one row that you see to the right and the one row that you see to the left, Beis Shammai is called a kedem. If it's less than 16 amas, since you don't have the din of korachas hakedem, since you do not have the din of korachas hakedem, why is that? Because korachas hakedem is only if it's inside a kedem gadol. Then what would be the din? You have to leave 4 amas. You have to leave 4 amas. But all of the rest you can plant. So what he meant to say is that when you have 3 rows or more, if you have slightly less than 16 between the rows, you cannot plant anything. When you only have 2 rows, what he meant to say is, if you have slightly less than 16, then you can plant in slightly less than 8. They are both saying the same nekuda, that if you have only 2 rows, Beis Shammai, and you have exactly 8 amas between them, you cannot plant there because each row forms a kedem. Forget about korachas hakedem. A kedem demands 4 amas from each side. You don't have anywhere where to plant. Which either way you're going to touch Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay, what we are still allowing to stand is that when you have 2 rows, when you have 3 rows, guys, in the Mishnah, when you have 3 rows, even though one was destroyed, the stringency of korachas hakedem stands, because it used to be a korachas hakedem. It used to be because on one side you had a kedem gadol. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. 1 second. But when you only have 2 rows, then you don't have the din of korachas hakedem. Which means we differentiate between whether you lechatchila planted 3 or whether now you have an opening. And indeed, as it was said b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, that it further fits Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's aligning himself with Beis Shammai, which is a big chiddush. Not legamre. It's never going to be 24 amas. But legabe kedem in 1 row. Now, Beis Shammai, you will also have to differentiate. There's a difference between whether you lechatchila planted in 1 way versus if you planted it and now it's destroyed. Asid Rozi Yaakov ke Beis Shammai. K'mo de Beis Shammai machmidim b'churbana yosim imatatoi. How is that? How is that, guys? According to Beis Shammai, I'll cup what I'm saying. When you planted a 3-row vineyard, Lib Beis Shammai, how much space is needed for you to be allowed to plant in between the rows? Beis Shammai will never say 24 amas. Beis Shammai only says 24 amas. I'm sorry, when you have a 2-row vineyard, Lib Beis Shammai, a 2-row vineyard of Beis Shammai never needs 24 amas. Even though you can argue our Mishnah is 16 amas is only Beis Hillel. We're not saying that. We're saying even Beis Shammai is minded that when you lechatchila plant 2 rows, there is no din of korachas hakedem. Once you have a space that has at least on one side a kedem gadol, now you have a din of korachas hakedem. And now, now that you remove the center row, in other words, that there is a difference between how you configure the vineyard lechatchila and how is the vineyard configured now that you destroyed the middle part. If you initial planted rows, according to Beis Shammai, we're saying even the Beis Shammai, 16 amas is sufficient. If you now removed a row in the middle of the vineyard, we don't say 16 amas is sufficient. You have to have 24 amas. So, now it's going to fit. No, he holds like Beis Hillel.
Wait, 24 total or 24 between the destroyed And the next
24
row.
between the row. No, but Beishamai holds that Beishamai never holds Kevan that when you plant a vineyard, there is any sheet of 24 amas. He never says that. Even Beishamai. Beishamai also is Moida, like our Mishnah holds, that the shear is 16 amas. When you have a Kedem Gadol, 16 amas. He says, Korachas HaKedem 24. There's a difference. If you lachatchila planted 16 amas apart, you're good, even LaBeishamai. But now that you have a Kedem Gadol, now that you have 3 rows and you remove a middle row, if you don't have 24 amas, now you can't plant it. So when you're machriv a Kedem, you have to be subject to a more stringent number. Same thing will be according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who we are saying in one detail subscribes to Beishamai that even 1 row is called a Kedem. But a Kedem Katan never doesn't stimulate the din of Korachas HaKedem. It does not. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that once you had 3 rows, which means both spaces have on one side a Kedem Gadol, now that you have the din of Kedem Gadol, even when you destroyed it, you have to be machmer, which is exactly how we explain the Mishnah. We have a few more minutes. Let's see how far we can get. Now we're focusing on Rav Shimon and Rav Meir. And they say that we do not differentiate. They only subscribe to 8 amas intervals. All of this is Gavaldi, guys. Now you understand Rav Shimon and Meir are lenient based on everything we learned today. That really the sheet is 8 amas, guys. Under 8 connected, 8 amas not connected. The only reason why we have in the Mishnah by Yakedem Gadol, L'Tanakama, you have the thing of under 16 is because we are making it into the Kedem Gadol. They don't make it into a Kedem Gadol. They don't make it Korachas HaKedem. They don't link Korachas HaKedem. Korachas HaKedem is only when you had a vineyard and now you cleared out space in the middle. Now you have a din of Korachas HaKedem. When you are lechatchila planting it, shear is only 8. Now the question is, how far were they lenient? Machlekes Amiroy. Rabbi Yoin, in the name of Rav, says that all they meant to say is that if you planted in a 3-row vineyard or more that had 8 amas under 16, not that lechatchila you should plant, but if you planted it, mutter means you can take benefit from it. You can benefit from it. It's not mekadesh, actually. So it's like above. No, Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rav says, no, that's not what they meant. They meant, not only will it not be mekadesh, lechatchila you can plant. If you have 8 amas or more intervals between rows, no matter how many rows you have, you do not have a kedem, period. Now, which understanding do we have? So it says the Gemara, Rav Chia Barashi, in the name of Rav, halacha k'Rav Meir v'Rav Shimon. Now again, which one? Which version of Rav in his understanding did he mean to paskin mutar azer or mutar l'zraya, or did he only mean mutar azer but for asal l'zraya? So clarifies the Gemara, min ma the Omar Rabbi ba, that mishach li Rav Chia Barashi, that Rav Shimon Achi, when he helped me plant my vineyard, you know what he did? He just made sure I had 8 amas between every row. Karmi mata shmaina al shmaina. And what was the point of him keeping it 8 amas apart? Why not under 8? Because obviously what he wanted was to be able to plant foreign seed in middle. People want to use the land to the maximum. And it sufficed lechatchila by having 8 amma intervals. Hada amra that mutar azera or mutar l'zroya. We'll stop over here, guys, and to be continued. This was Gavaldik. Now
I don't fully understand that last raya there. Meaning, how does the fact that it was 8 amas prove that lechatchila you're allowed to plant there? What others should he done?
Because what we learned today, Danny, was for sure, according to the Tanakama and according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, for sure, even the Tanakama, that when you have 3 rows, the reason why, only if it's 16 amas apart, are you allowed to plant, do you not have a kedem, is because if you have under 16, we will view the gaps as korachas hakedem. What's the din of korachas hakedem, Danny? Korachas hakedem means that you're not allowed to plant in it, but if you did, you will never make it asur b'hana. If Rab Meir and Rab Shimon also agree with that, no one is going to want to violate an Isur D'Rabbanan. For him to have an Amoira helping him work out his vineyard in a way, he made a vineyard of 100 rows. He says, just make sure that you have 8 amas between the rows. And the intent was for him to be able to use his land better. Is a raya that even lechatchila you can plant. Based on whom? Based on Rab Meir and Rab Shimon. It must be that way. Tanakama doesn't hold of that. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't hold by that. Only Rab Shimon holds of that. Rab Meir holds of that.
And is that 8? When he says 8, is it actually 8 and a bit? Like
No. Before? 8 and a bit will only be needed leBeis Shammai, because according to Beis Shammai, you have a kerem by having 1 row. LeBeis Hillel will be passing like Beis Hillel, since you don't even know it's in between, there's only 1 row. 1 row can never make a kerem. I don't care if you have 5 vines or 100 vines. Very good, Danny. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is side. He holds like a Beis Shammai. We don't hold like Beis Shammai.
So because there's 8 amas, when you
have 3 rows, according to the Tanakama, and according to the Tanakama, and for sure according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that any gap, let's say you left 10 amas in between. Any gap of these 10 amas are viewed like korachas hakerem. Why? Because on one side you have a kerem, you have 2 rows. Rav Meir and Rab Shimon are disagreeing with that. They're saying even if you have 5 rows, so when the area in between has a kerem from one side, a kerem from the other side, or 4 rows.
Yeah.
Even over there, the din of korachas hakerem is only if you emptied out space from a kerem that was already made a kerem. How do you make
no korachas hakerem? So what?
If you made rows of 5 amas intervals, and now you emptied out a row, everyone agrees that there's the Isur D'Rabbanan to plant. But if lechatchila you planted it 8 amas apart, according to the Reb Shimon, you never made a kedem. There was no kedem. Kedem means 2 rows. LeBeis Hillel. You don't have 2 rows; they don't connect. And if you don't have a kedem, you're only bound by the rule of.
So you have 100 rows as long as they're 8 amas apart. There's no kedem.
That's according to Beis Hillel, according to the way we paskin, according to Rav Meir and Rab Shimon.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
It's over 8 amos. Or it's 8 amos.
According to Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, it has to be under 8 amos.
Under 8. So because you have 8, you can't plant. Got it.
The only shita that will hold that under 8 you still cannot plant because of korachas hakerem is only if you hold like Beis Shammai that a kerem is 1 row.